everyone, welcome back. We're going to start working on feet today. And I'm sort of looking at this doll's feet, although her feet are, there's not a lot of detail on her feet. I mean, she has toes, but they're sort of flat. But we got to attach them to the feet to the bottom of the lower leg, to the ankle with a ball. And so I want to look at detail as well as attaching them. So we're going to pull out a piece of clay, and I'm just going to sort of use this as a rough guide for size because these are going to be a similar size doll. These are more like the 1/4 size doll, so I think the size will be good, and maybe we'll just add a little bit more detail, like a little bit more curve to the bottom of the foot, etc. But probably not going to go too wild on detail since it's my first doll. So I'm taking a piece of clay about this big. Gonna get it in the general shape and recognizing that a lot of the detail work will come after when it's dry. It's just too hard to try to get a lot of detail in this soft clay. But if we can get it about the right thickness and depth and general shape, then once it's dry, we'll be able to do a whole lot more to make it look like an actual foot. So all I did was just imprint the bottom of the doll's foot on the clay just to give me a rough outline of the size. I didn't indent it too much because I'm just looking for the shape. I'm not looking for the detail work. And then I'm just going to cut it out with the X-Acto around the edges so that I have the shape, basically. Now, I think I did end up making the top of the foot where the toe is wider than, too much wider. In other words, I think the toes tend to go inward a little bit, so I'll think about that if I do this again. But the basic outline, I think, was helpful to start with, because if you try to mold it into that shape instead of cutting it into that shape, everything kind of gets out of whack. So with this, I was able to get a general sense of the size of the foot and where the toes are and that sort of thing. So at this point, then, it's just a matter of sort of molding it into that shape that we want to have before it dries, and keeping in mind that it will be an exaggerated shape. It will be much more like a hobbit foot than a real foot. And then I'm just going to mark where the toes are. Sorry, my finger's in the way. I don't always see this stuff when I'm filming. Sorry, guys, but with the camera over my shoulder, it's a little difficult to always know exactly what is going to be on the screen or not. But you get the idea. We're just using the sharp end of this metal tool and marking where the toes are. And that was from the outline. And then I'll use the X-Acto to actually cut through. So we are going to cut through the thickness of it so that we have actual delineated toes. And if you get a lot of clay built up on your tool, you can just rub it on one of those sanding blocks and it will come right off. It helps a lot. Once we have the toes separated, then it's a matter of using the sharpness of the X-Acto and the duller end of this thing to separate the toes a little bit and make them more rounded looking and not so squarish. I'm also pushing the clay up to create that pad at the top of the foot near the toes on the underneath side. And if you have to, you could always add a little bit more clay there. But the foots, have the curve on the bottom where there's the rounded part up near the toes, the pad of the foot, and then there's the arch of the foot that will have a indentation upward. And then the top of the foot tends to be kind of straight, but there is a little bit of an indentation drop off from the foot part to the toe part. So I did carve out that a little bit to make it a little bit more like the actual look of a foot, whereas that doll's foot is kind of like just straight down from the ankle curve down to the end of the toes. And that's fine, because if you think about it, those dolls, they're kind of made for you to be able to put clothes on them and shoes on them and that sort of thing. And I can imagine that the shoes, they're all kind of the same size for that size doll, for the 1/4 size doll. So the shoes would have to fit a variety of different dolls from different manufacturers. I'm wondering if there's probably a kind of general consensus of size and thickness and that sort of thing so that the clothes can fit. I don't know. I don't know if my foot's going to be probably a little thicker. Is it going to fit in the standard clothing, or am I going to have to make my own shoes, which will be a pain in the butt, but that's okay. I mean, there are people too that make these as art dolls and they're not even made for clothes. So it's really probably going to be custom items of clothing made for those type of dolls. So it's, something to consider. What do you want? Do you want a doll you can pose and put clothes on, or do you want an artistic doll that maybe just wears the same thing from birth to death? But the tools I used, mostly were the X-Acto and that metal tool. So they've dried overnight, and we have the rough shape now, but you can see they don't really look like a human foot. They look like hobbit feet. They're very thick and not completely like you would want the shape to be. So we will be doing a whole lot of sanding. But I do want to look at them at this point and see if they're about the same size. That's one of the major concerns, is that both feet are pretty much the same size. That's going to be important because, first of all, if you want to have the doll try to stand, and one foot is not as thick as the other, she's going to be lopsided. And if the one foot is bigger than the other width or whatever, and then you do have shoes, they're not going to fit. So I'm using my two X-Actos, the one with the sharp point and the one with the curved point. And then also I'm cleaning off the clay on my tool, so I'll have that nice and ready in case I need to use it. So what you can do with the X-Acto is you kind of go in and start rounding the toes by cutting off one side where the sharp edge is and making it more of a rounded look. And this is tedious work, because if you slip, you're going to cut off a toe. So just be very careful. And I've also noticed that as I work, the blades get dull, there's more of a tendency for it to scrape the clay or take off too much. So having a nice sharp blade is important. So always have a good supply of those on hand. You can scrape, you can cut, however much you need to take off is sort of the determining factor. And I'm just constantly looking at the foot versus a picture I pulled up on the internet of a foot, which I think is helpful, to have a model. I couldn't look at my own foot because I had socks on. But if you pull up a picture, you can kind of look at that. You can get a foot from different angles, pictures to look at. And then it's just a matter of looking at the picture and trying to make the foot you have look like that. Now, the top of this foot doesn't have to be, at the ankle doesn't have to be exactly right, because we're going to be adding clay to that eventually to make a base for where we're going to put the ball that's going to connect to the leg, and that part will be kind of covered up. But the rest of the foot, I'd love to get it as much carved and sanded as I can before I do that part, just so that it's easier to handle. It's just really hard to handle when you're doing this. And I was going to think about making a carve of the toenail shape, but then I decided that might be easier to do with paint or shading afterwards, like maybe with some pastels to just sort of shade that a different color or paint it a different color. We're going to have to put a coating over this clay once everything is complete to protect it and make it smooth, but that's another video way down the line. After we do this foot stuff, we're going to do the hands. That's going to really be a whole bunch of fun, I'm sure. And then we have to do the face, and that will be the most difficult part because it has the most detail and the most detail that can really mess up how it looks. So anyway, just keep sanding and carving till you get the shape as close as you can to where you want it to be. We'll be doing a little bit more work on these feet after we add the ball, but mostly you want to get them as close as you can. And every time you do this, if you have to add any clay, you have to let it wait overnight. So it does take a few days to get all this done. You definitely don't want to start trying to carve or sand before the clay is completely dry. All right, so now we're just looking at how that fits with the leg, and I think it looks like it's gonna match pretty well in terms of the shape and the size. And then we're going to just make an indentation. We add clay to it and make an indentation with the leg to make the attachment. So you'll just put a blob of clay on there and then stick the leg down on top of it. And I almost thought I could use that rounded piece that pooches up after you do that to be the ball, but then I decided I probably am going to need it to be hollow. I'm not sure if it does. But after that, you're going to have to let those dry overnight because you've got wet clay. And then basically you're going to be doing some carving here. You got to get rid of that ball in the middle because, like I said, that's just really not going to work for what we want to do. It's going to have to be a different size for one thing. And basically what I did is just stick the X-Acto through there and start digging it out. Once you get it cut off, usually the rounded X-Acto works better to get a rounded hole. This is where the ball will fit down into. And then the sides, what you want is for the sides to kind of look like they're an extension of the ankle from the foot up, because we'll be putting clay in there to attach the ball. So you don't want that outside part to be too much bigger than the actual leg that it goes into. You would like that to be very similar. Now granted, it might be a little bit thicker because of the way we put we molded the leg part in it, but get it as close as you can, and you can always carve it down a little bit on the outside or sand it down. But get you a nice round hole, and then we're going to look at different size balls to go in there that will fit inside the leg properly. This will be a movable joint, so it has to be able to move within there. So I had two size balls, and this first one is a little bit too big, although that's the one I thought would work. This one is the one I thought I'd use for the hands. It's really small, but ends up that's going to be the right size. So I'll have to make an even tinier ball to go on the wrist, which will be interesting. But now I'm just making sure this hole is nice and round and that it moves well on the ball as a joint. And then you want to make sure you keep your two legs and your balls and your feet separate that go together. Otherwise, they are just a little, maybe tiny bit different. So you don't want to get those mixed up or they won't work well together. So I've just made a point of keeping them at separate places on my table so I don't get them mixed up. So now I'm going to cut out a hole and remove the styrofoam ball that's in this little tiny ball. I'm not sure yet if I need to do that, honestly. I'll be frank with you. I think it needs to be hollow because the ankle is going to move and it's going to have a groove in it as best I can understand. So I don't know. We'll see when we get to that part of the book. I'm not really sure exactly how that's going to work yet, but I'm going to make it hollow. So we hollowed out the ball and made sure that it fits properly. And then we're just going to wet that inside and outside, because we're going to be adding clay on the outside as well to make it molded straight into the ball from the foot up. So just don't leave too much water in there. I just use my fingernail to get some of that extra water out that I sprayed in. And then just take a little piece of clay and roll it out into a little rope and make a circle. Put it down into the foot and then squish the ball down in with the hole pointed downward. And then the top part will be solid. But we'll be able to open it up if we need to, which I think we should have to. We'll see. So anyway, now you're just going to be smoothing out that clay on the outside so that it melts with the ankle of the foot. So you want a smooth look. And also mention that you wanted that to be just a little bit back from the heel because our ankles don't go straight up from the heel. There's a little bit of a bulge of the heel before the ankle starts. So just kind of keep that in mind when you're positioning that first part that you put the leg down into. And then just smooth this down as much as you can. You can see how that looks. And then we're going to let these feet dry overnight. I'll do the other foot off camera. All right, so we've got our feet done, and you can see there's a little bit of a ridge there where I joined it, and I want to I'll use the X-Acto to cut that off so I don't spend so much time sanding. If it's a big area like that, the X-Acto is a better way to go. You just scrape off the excess clay, and then you can sand it down. So that's what I'm doing now, just working on that. This is really kind of the last stages of this project. We want to just get the foot as close to where we want it to be as possible. Obviously, we may still do some tweaking down the road as we get ready to put her together, but get it smoothed out as much as you can, get it shaped well, make sure it fits within the leg. And then that's really the main part of this video, getting the feet part ready. So what we'll do is just take a quick look at the way the leg fits on there and the way the clay has been melded into the foot to make sure it looks like it's all one piece and not blobs of clay on it. So keep sanding and carving until you get it where you want it, but turns out it's looking pretty good. I mean, it's still got some work, but make sure that your leg fits on it and can move properly. And then the other thing I want to do is look at the two legs side by side and make sure they're about the same height and shape. So hope you enjoyed this. Next video we'll be working on hands. Hope to see you there. We'll continue this project of a Japanese ball jointed doll. Thanks and bye.